After that, the basin of warm water was taken out of Blair's room. The maid's hand was wrapped in bandages from the bullying she had endured earlier. To her, caring for Blair was a duty she could not neglect. Fortunately, Blair's fever had broken, and she would likely recover by tomorrow morning. Lena figured she would brush the Duchess's hair again in the morning. While lost in thought, she ran into two other maids coming the opposite way. One of them expressed fake sympathy for Lena having to work so late. The young maid knew the Duchess had fallen ill and felt quite panicked. The other maid reminded Lena to take care of her own health, noting that Lena's workload had been far too heavy lately. She shot her a sideways glance and sneered, "To heal that wound faster, you'd better watch where you're going next time. If you fall again, there probably won't be a single intact spot left on your body." Lena immediately recalled their vicious demeanor from the other day. They had never been kind to her. It was these two who had tripped her, causing her to drop and shatter the vase in her hands. Lena had lost her balance and fallen into those razor-sharp shards. Her hands trembling and still aching, Lena remained silent. She stood there alone. Having followed Blair to this castle, she had no one to defend her. Her dean was not yet resting. In his study, an assistant handed him a luxurious catalogue. "My lord, Countess Sionel has sent the sample catalogue." Her dean, about to take off his coat, gave it an indifferent glance. "Ah, that's right. The New Year's festival is approaching, isn't it?" "Yes." She said to select the fabric for the Duchess's dress first. She mentioned she would order rare fabrics. Her dean gazed intently at the fashion samples, but his mind was still plagued by frustration over the name Azil that Blair had deliriously called out earlier. He was so irritated that he had to close his eyes to calm himself. Her dean then handed the catalog back to his assistant with a curt instruction. "Whatever will do." The assistant's eyes widened in confusion, unsure of how to proceed. Her dean added a specific instruction. "Tell her to choose the warmest fabric and don't worry about the price." Hearing that, it was obvious enough who those fabrics were meant for. Before long, following the Duke's orders, the clothing items were laid out before them, luxurious fabrics stacked high. Madame Sionel cheerfully announced that she had selected a fabric that was both warm and lightweight. With the refined eye of an experienced designer, she praised, "His Grace must have been very worried that the Duchess might fall ill again. You've only just recovered, haven't you?" she asked Blair. But in response to that warmth, Blair wasn't fully listening. She noted that her maid hadn't been present the entire morning. Blair also thanked the designer for her wedding dress from before. It was fortunate that she visited just as Blair recovered, allowing her to express her gratitude in person. Madame Sionel sincerely said it was an honor to design for the most beautiful woman in the empire, especially for these post-wedding garments. She suggested picking out a dress design right away, but Blair was too busy worrying about Lena. Madame Sionel finally finished her work and headed for the door, not forgetting to smile brightly and promise to return with the completed dress for our Duchess. Blair glanced at the unfamiliar maid beside her. The old woman's cold expression made Blair even more anxious. She asked where Lena had gone. "I haven't seen her since she helped me change." The maid gave a faint smile and replied, "I'm not sure. Should I go look for her?" Blair didn't trust the woman. She picked up her fur coat. No need. She draped the coat over herself and walked toward the door, much to the maid's curiosity. "Are you going for a walk?" Blair declined any company. "I'll go alone." She stepped outside, the biting cold making Blair feel more awake. In the freezing air, she looked faint and lonely. Blair glanced around, her face etched with worry. She deliberately searched for Lena among the servants, but there was no sign of her anywhere. Instead of Lena serving her today, a replacement had been sent. Suddenly, she thought of Lena's bandaged hand. Something wasn't right. Blair's face grew pale with fear. She stopped behind a group of maids who were gossiping about Lena. "Hey, where's Lena? Don't tell me she's hiding somewhere crying?" They sneered at each other. "No way. She hasn't even slept. She's off washing up. Just like her master, equally stubborn. Though getting rid of that stench will take some effort." "Listen, I hope she doesn't go running to her master to tattle, right?" "If she was going to do that, she would have done it ages ago," they reassured each other. Suddenly, Lena spotted Blair from behind and called out, "Duchess!" Blair's eyes were so filled with fury that she looked like she had lost her soul. Lena asked worriedly, "Why are you standing at the door?" Blair's eyes were welling up with tears. Lena would never have endured such treatment before. Blair painfully realized that she had been suffering in silence just to protect her master's reputation. She must have done the exact same thing in their past life. Blair felt a wave of remorse. Another thing. Something I failed to fix because I was too busy wallowing in my own misery. She hurriedly grabbed Lena's hand. Then she pulled Lena right in front of those maids and shouted loudly, "Apologize!" Realizing the Duchess's presence, the maids cowered in fear. Blair repeated, "I told you to apologize to Lena." The oldest among them looked at Blair with disdain and replied, "Duchess, I don't understand what you're talking about. Have we committed some sort of mistake?" Our Blair remembered that she was both a princess and a duchess, wielding considerable authority. Now, she finally put her status to use. A resounding slap landed on that sly old woman's face with all her might. It was the first time she had ever hit someone. The sheer brutality of it made her disgusted with herself. She almost threw up. Kind-hearted Blair felt like she was turning dark and vicious like her mother, and the thought terrified her. Yet she chose to fight to protect Lena instead of letting her suffer on her behalf. Blair glared fiercely. "You know exactly what I'm talking about." Lena, who had been trembling with fear this whole time, hurriedly grabbed her arm. "Duchess, I'm really fine, truly. If this gets blown out of proportion..." Blair cut Lena off. "No." Tears streamed down her face as she could no longer hold back. "It's not fine at all." She turned to her poor maid. "I absolutely loathe that you have to endure this kind of treatment because of me." Just then, a cold, authoritative man's voice rang out as he approached them. "What's going on here?" It was Reborn walking toward them. The noises echoing all the way down the hallway. The maid who had just taken Blair's slap held her face and groaned, "Grand Duke!" She thought she would receive her master's protection. But the way Reborn was glaring didn't look very favorable for her. He paid no attention whatsoever to anyone other than his wife, who was sobbing uncontrollably. Furthermore, he carefully observed her reddened hand and noticed that Blair seemed to be in pain. A low growl escaped Reborn's lips. The maid immediately fell to her knees and begged, "My lord." Feigning a tone of wrongful accusation, she argued, "The Duchess seems to have misunderstood. This girl didn't complete her assigned duties, so I punished her." She cried loudly, and yet she dared to be insolent. The fabricated story poured out just like any other workplace drama. But Reborn finally looked down and said, "I wasn't asking you." That deathly glare sent a chill down the old woman's spine, silencing her act entirely. Blair spoke up. "I punished them. These girls bullied and humiliated the maid I brought with me." The rest of the maids stood frozen, not daring to argue further. Only the old woman, who had been looking down on Blair all along, was certain that no matter what, the Duke would never side with the daughter of his enemy. She glared sideways at the Duchess with an insolent look, cursing inwardly, "She should know her place." But Reborn's words left everyone in shock. He spoke to his wife and no one else. "This is my fault for not disciplining my subordinates properly. I will deal with these women immediately." The maid was truly terrified now. Lena, the main character of this drama, was so scared her heart nearly leapt out of her chest. She hurriedly pleaded, "My lord, it's fine. Everyone was just joking around a bit. It's part of getting to know each other." Lena turned to Blair and begged, "Isn't that right, Duchess?" She wanted to protect her master's reputation to the very end. Blair replied wearily and reluctantly, "Well, I was indeed angry, but I think such a punishment is too harsh. If they made a mistake, if they were kicked out of the Duke's estate, their futures would be miserable. A sincere apology and docking half this month's pay is enough." Reborn calmly looked at the trembling maids on the ground without an ounce of pity. They were shamelessly wailing and begging for forgiveness. Reborn didn't make things any harder for them. He coldly ordered, "You should apologize to my wife and this maid, not me." He glanced toward his assistant. "Tell Mason to dock 2 months of their pay." Blair looked at him, wanting to plead for them. "Reborn," but he casually replied as he took off his gloves, "I believe this punishment is already quite lenient for them." His assistant urged him, "All right, my lord, it's time to go." Reborn replied, "Right away." He stepped closer and placed a gentle kiss on his wife's forehead. The hand that had just removed the glove patted her shoulder reassuringly. He said in a deep voice, "I have to go now. See you later." Blair was so astonished that her sadness completely vanished. Reborn walked past the maids, casting a brief, murderous glare at them, then instructed politely, "This woman is my wife, so do not let this happen again." Blair stood dazed. This was truly a warning to everyone in the estate, not just to them. She watched his back as he walked out the main doors. Dean had actually believed her. But why? She looked at her throbbing hand, wondering why she felt this emptiness instead of relief. She clenched her hand tightly as a way to calm herself down. And so, the incident passed peacefully. Lena strode down the hallway, her heart aching for Blair's delicate hand that had just been bruised. Lena felt miserable, never expecting her to hit someone with hands that had never done any hard labor. The way Blair, with her noble status, had cried over Lena's bandaged hand moved her endlessly. Feeling both touched and sorrowful for her master, Lena looked down gloomily. "My lady, I'm here, I'm coming in," Lena called out at the door while carrying a basin of water. As soon as she reached the door, she began to babble. "I think it would be better if you soaked your hand in cold water." Suddenly, Lena panicked and dropped the basin of water she had carefully brought over. The poor maid's voice trembled. "Your Highness the Princess?" Out on the balcony, Blair looked back at Lena. She looked genuinely cool in her black cloak. Before she could reply, Lena rushed over and hugged her tightly, preventing Blair from jumping. It took her a lot of effort to finally utter, "You misunderstand. Let go of me first." Lena didn't hear her clearly and wailed, "No, I won't let go. If you commit suicide, I'll die with you." Blair struggled and cried out softly, "That's not it." But Lena's rescue mission didn't stop. "No, I won't listen to anything you say unless you step back inside. Hurry up and get inside." Little Blair was lifted up like a cat, as usual. She was completely powerless against those who were stronger. Blair gasped, "Quiet, Lena. I have to go somewhere secretly. That's why I'm climbing down this way." Lena finally snapped out of it. "What?" "This is madness. What if you fall and get hurt? It's only the second floor, but still, there are bushes down there." Blair confidently presented her flimsy rope ladder invention. "I've planned this very carefully, so you don't have to worry." Lena stared dumbfoundedly at her princess. To her, Blair was an elegant girl. However, she was occasionally stubborn to the point of madness. Lena demanded, "Then where the hell are you planning to go at this hour?" And so their adventure began, in a carriage that was already waiting for them. Lena poked her head out to observe and guessed where they had stopped. "This bustling street even at night. Is this the Merchant Guild District?" Blair stepped out of the carriage and instructed, "It's the building right in front. I'll be right back." Lena was so scared she was on the verge of tears. "If you don't come out in 30 minutes, I'm going in to find you. I mean it." Blair stayed silent, waving her hand as a signal of agreement. She was full of excitement for her plan. The massive signboard hanging on the building clearly read, "Liberius Guild." Blair knew quite a bit. Rumor had it that they boasted top-tier earnings. Since her dean was looking for a new hypnotherapist, the restoration of her memories would be delayed for a while. It was a good time, Blair thought, as she reached out to open the door and stepped inside. She assessed the rowdy crowd around her while calculating her divorce plans during this time frame. A young noblewoman stepping into the tavern inevitably drew attention. Her delicate and gorgeous face, revealed beneath her cloak's hood, left the crowd of men stunned. They stared wide-eyed, completely forgetting to drink. A burly man gleefully said, "Oh ho, truly a beauty at first sight." He stood up and approached Blair. "Beautiful lady, what brings you here?" Blair looked at him in shock. This situation was beyond her ability to handle. It was far scarier than she had imagined. Another man sneered, "Hey, who invited their lover to the guild? Speak up." They began to jeer more aggressively. "I think she's mine." "What are you talking about? She looks more like my wife." Blair cautiously spoke up. "I am here to see the guildmaster." The burly man from earlier replied coldly, "The guildmaster is busy. He doesn't handle small matters like this." He stepped closer, soliciting, "Instead, why don't you talk to us?" He leaned in close to her face. "We'll handle it cheaply and quickly. How about we get a drink and discuss it? What gave our beautiful lady the courage to come here?" These scums were a far cry from her husband's elegance, disgusting Blair to the point that she clenched her fists tightly. A calm male voice rang out, "Stop teasing her, you'll scare her away." A ring with a blue gemstone was held up in front of his face. The one-eyed man immediately fell silent. Blair stated decisively, "Please take me to see the guildmaster." The man let out a sinister, amused chuckle. Then he roared, grinding his teeth, "Do you think we're a bunch of stray dogs? Do you think we just wag our tails for money?" Blair remained silent, suppressing the fear in her heart, and then abruptly replied, Haven't you all been in this business for a long time? Then you should know how to behave better, shouldn't you? Or do you not realize how foolish it is to kill the goose that lays the golden eggs? The crowd fell silent, staring at the young girl in front of them. They clearly weren't afraid of her. A few people started murmuring curiously. What, is she some big shot? Did we mess with the wrong person? In a corner, a bartender worked quietly, ignoring the commotion around him. A man dressed in black loudly asked, "Ah, so we have a client?" Wearing an authoritative plague doctor mask, the mysterious man said, "You are the one who wishes to see me?" Blair looked at him and sighed. She asserted, "No, I want to see the guildmaster." The masked man claimed to be the guildmaster once again, but Blair turned away angrily. "Is deceiving customers the rule of Liberius?" She walked straight to the bar and spoke directly to the bartender. "I want to submit my request to the guildmaster of Liberius." The young man with his refined appearance and godly side profile finally looked up, feigning indifference. He slowly set down the glass in his hand and ended his part-time shift. "May I ask why you think I am the guildmaster?" Blair exposed him. When I asked for the master, they all looked around and whispered. You alone simply listened. I'll ask about your reasons for testing me another time. The handsome young man gave a faint, amused smile. He proudly said, "Impressive, you truly have a sharp eye." Then he suggested moving the conversation to a quieter place. They entered the guild's office, and the conversation became formal. "Allow me to introduce myself, Duchess. My name is Mikhail Kinnis." He bowed respectfully according to protocol. "Please forgive my prior offense. I wanted to gauge the level of your desperation, Duchess." With a stoic expression, he admitted, "Those who come to me are all desperate enough to pay the corresponding price." Blair reassured him, "It's fine. It only shows you are confident in your ability to succeed flawlessly and cleanly." The boss smiled and bowed in agreement. Liberius will not betray that trust. Mikhail sat down and seriously asked for the details of the client's request. Blair, with her youthful face, tried to act tough and held up 3 fingers. "I have 3 requests. First, find me a small villa near Argenta, the capital of the Clania Kingdom, and a new identity so I can live without my current name." The boss glanced at her, wondering about her motives for fleeing the duchy as Blair folded one finger down. She continued, "Second, I need a few men to be involved in a scandal with me, around 4 or 5. They must all be trustworthy enough to keep this an absolute secret." The guildmaster suggested, "In that case, it would be best if I were one of them. That way I can report the progress to you directly. Would that be okay?" Blair nodded in agreement. "If you don't mind, I'd like that as well. I can trust you." He asked impatiently, "When do you want the scandal to officially break out?" Blair froze. She asked why she had been figured out so quickly. "You catch on really fast, just as expected from a professional. That will make things easier. I want it to happen next month." Mikhail looked at her with skepticism and suddenly chuckled. "Then we must begin immediately. And what is your final request?" Blair slowly pulled something out from her sleeve. She carefully placed a piece of paper on the table. "I need you to find the owner of a knife engraved with this design." Mikhail took the small drawing in his hand and scanned his memory. Then he promised to bring back the investigation results as soon as possible for the client in front of him. Blair left satisfied, personally escorted out by the guildmaster himself. The crowd bowed respectfully to the Duchess as she walked out the door. Mikhail felt a bit unsettled inside. He lowered his gaze to hide his emotions beneath a stoic exterior. However, he couldn't help but feel amused and let out a soft chuckle. The subordinates' curiosity about their master's hospitable attitude was answered by him. "I just had some indecent thoughts." With such a serious face, Mikhail recounted the event to his subordinates. He wondered to himself, "That gesture, it was as if she was treating me like a child." "To be honest, she is quite cute," they agreed regarding this new client. Outside the guild building, one of Herdine's subordinates stood eavesdropping. He then returned and immediately reported the entire incident to the Duke that very night. "My lord, the Duchess visited a guild." Herdine stopped the cigar in his hand, looking curious. "What are you suddenly talking about?" The assistant recounted that Sir Jerome had been patrolling the estate, and he had seen the Duchess sneaking out with her personal maid an hour ago. He had followed them and watched them enter the merchant guild. Herdine was quite curious. At what time? The assistant confirmed they had returned home safely. The Duke muttered, Who would have thought my gentle-looking wife had a hobby of sneaking out? She has certainly surprised me. The assistant asked if they should investigate the reasons behind her actions, but her husband didn't find it necessary. Herdine's friend was worried that the Duchess might collude with the royal family, or even try to seize control of the Delmark family herself. But her husband analyzed both theories. First, the royal family wouldn't risk using the princess. The emperor had no shortage of obedient pawns. That sounded completely reasonable. Next, whether they had any future plans, that was also a matter for another time. He trusted in the power he possessed. It was a strong enough card that Herdine could never be discarded as long as the emperor reigned. The friend asked again, then why did she go to the guild? How could Herdine know? He was far more curious about what thoughts were running through his wife's little head. He knew Mikhail's personality. The man would keep his business secrets, and digging into it would only cause an uproar, and then she would just hide things even more meticulously. Beneath his calm exterior, Herdine was also quite impatient. He was so lost in thought that he forgot to finish the cigar in his hand. Suddenly, he ordered, "For now, just keep an eye on her. Don't get caught." And just like that, a few days quickly passed. Tomorrow was the New Year's festival. Blair welcomed a rather special guest, a middle-aged woman. She introduced herself as Agnes Laureline. I belong to a vassal family of the Delmark Duchy. She was a hypnotherapist hired by Herdine. With a gentle demeanor, she curtsied respectfully. I will do my best to help you recover your memories, Duchess. Blair replied politely, Thank you. Tea was poured for the guest while she spoke mildly. I won't immediately force your memories to surface. We'll start by helping you get used to them. She was straightforward. Duchess, you have lost a portion of your memories due to severe psychological trauma. Forcing them in this case will only cause you to bury them deeper. Blair was curious. Getting used to them, what does that mean? The therapist planned for them to have relaxing tea sessions like this every week, and she would listen to Blair talk about her childhood. She smiled kindly. Any story will do. Blair was hesitant, as this method would be time-consuming, and she was quite in a hurry with her escape plan. She calculated that if she didn't manage to end this contract marriage before getting pregnant, Herdine would definitely find out about the child. And every time she underwent hypnosis, she would suffer agonizing pain. That would be dangerous if she were already pregnant. In 6 months, according to the original timeline, Azil would come into this world. She needed to recover her memories before then, at any cost. That anxiety did not escape the therapist's eyes. She looked at Blair thoughtfully and sympathetically, then said, Please don't worry too much, Duchess. I will help you recover your memories. She held Blair's hand sincerely. Please relax and trust me. Blair felt more at ease. All right. By listening to your stories, Duchess, I will learn about another lifetime. The conversation grew more intimate. Come to think of it, today is already the last day of the year. Yes, time really does fly. Madame Agnes suddenly thought of a slightly difficult topic, which was Blair's memory of the New Year's festival. She was quite surprised by this question. Yes, from the accident that year, do you remember anything that happened during the festival? Even a small detail is fine. Blair hesitated, reassuring herself. It probably won't be too hard. She closed her eyes to relax. Because that was the day I met Herdine. The memory easily surfaced in her mind. It was something she had always cherished. At that banquet, the nobles chatted in the lavish halls of the imperial palace. Back then, she was about to turn 11, and she was exchanging greetings with her relatives. After putting on a beautiful dress, Blair skipped happily to the former empress's palace. For some reason, the empress had been so busy lately that she couldn't even see her. The innocent little girl was looking forward to playing cards with the empress. I'll definitely win today, just watch. As the doors to the empress's palace opened, the little princess ran in, calling her name with joy. The empress gently turned around. You're just in time. Beside her, a young boy was observing her. Blair guessed this was the nephew the empress often mentioned. She often told her that he was her only nephew and the current head of the Delmark family. She added, He is very lonely. It would be wonderful if he had a good friend like you, Blair. Blair confidently said, Don't worry, Your Majesty. I'll definitely become his friend when we meet. And now Herdine was standing right in front of her, full of coldness. Greet her, Herdine. This is the princess, the empress reminded him. The young boy Herdine knelt down to pay his respects. Hirdine of the Delmark family sends his greetings to you, princess. Although all his gestures were elegant, his eyes were as cold as a deep lake, which frightened her. Blair replied, It's nice to meet you, Delmark. The Empress looked at the two children, quite pleased, believing they would become close. But the awkwardness between them wouldn't be easily dispelled. The Empress suggested playing cards, and Blair was naturally excited. The chairs were rearranged so they could begin their fun. Blair nestled beside the Empress, looking at Hirdine, who seemed unapproachable. Delmark was a family that everyone once envied, but they had now fallen. They were the subject of gossip among the nobles, those who always gloated over the misfortunes of others. The origins of the Delmarks, the price they had to pay, and how everything ended. It was a mystery to many, not just to the little princess. Blair felt that he was quite intimidating. Hirdine sensed the round eyes glued to him. He glanced back and showed no hostility toward the beautiful little girl. The game began, and Hirdine secretly observed the angelic little princess in front of him. She intently calculated the cards in her hand, and the ones in Hirdine's hand. She reached out to draw a card amid his silence. The early feats of the Delmark ancestors had built their family's reputation. There was a national hero who had saved the country during the last magic war. To gain that power, he had forged a pact with a legendary divine beast. In exchange, he received a powerful body capable of using both magic and aura. Normally, one could only wield one of these two abilities. But that duke had used both to achieve victory and save the nation. However, everything has its price. The greater the power, the higher the cost. Mixing aura and magic was like mixing oil and fire. If controlled well, they would resonate, but a single mistake could cause a loss of control. The power bestowed upon the first master had been passed down through generations. Hirdine's father, the previous duke, was their descendant. Just like his ancestors, he had used his power for the people and the empire. Everyone both feared and admired him. However, tragedy struck without warning. It happened the year Hirdine turned 12. During a family picnic in the forest, his parents were attacked by demonic beasts. Upon discovering this, Hirdine's father lost control and slaughtered every monster in the forest. By then, he had gone mad. And to protect his son from being killed by his own hands, he used his final moment of clarity to end his own life, right in front of a terrified little Hirdine. The fall of the revered Delmark family and their tragedy became a topic of conversation for curious strangers. It wasn't hard for this information to circulate within the imperial palace. And they whispered to one another that the son of the Delmark family also inherited this power, meaning he could also go mad at any moment. Hirdine reminded her, Princess, it's your turn. Blair hesitated over the card she was about to draw. She had already lost 4 rounds, and no child ever wants to lose. Amidst Hirdine's patience, Blair slowly drew an ace of hearts from his hand. Hirdine's eyes suddenly widened as he looked at her. Blair was also startled by that stroke of luck. 2 cards with bright red hearts sat next to each other. Blair cheered, I win! While Blair was still busy celebrating her victory, Hirdine stood up to take his leave. The Empress also realized it was getting quite late. Hirdine promised to return the next day, while Blair couldn't stop smiling from her recent stroke of luck. The Empress said gently, Hirdine, I understand how you feel, but you don't have to force yourself to attend tomorrow's banquet. He bowed his head and replied, I am fine. The door closed with a sense of regret. The Empress turned and asked Blair, What do you think of Hirdine? Do you think the two of you could become friends? Blair was momentarily stumped by that difficult question. She replied shyly, He is quite quiet, so it's hard to guess, but he seems like a good person. The Empress sighed. Blair, lying for too long will become a bad habit. Blair spoke honestly. To be honest, the Lord of Delmark seems both polite and impolite at the same time. The Empress laughed. I'm glad Hirdine didn't hear that. Blair startled. But this is only our first time meeting. She said sincerely, Since your Majesty cares for him, I'm sure he must be a good person. I mean it. The Empress looked at her, pleased and gentle. She suddenly grabbed Blair's small hands and pulled her into a hug. On the soft sofa, her voice was soothing. To be honest, Hirdine is not a warm person. He carries deep scars in his heart, so he always feels awkward around others. But that doesn't mean you have to endure him, because you are just as precious to me as he is. She kissed Blair's forehead affectionately. Blair beamed in her embrace. It was a comfort for the little girl. Because her own biological mother would never be so gentle with her. She had never spoken such words to Blair. The sun soon rose, and the New Year's festival officially began. That morning, as usual, the royal family and other noble houses went hunting for sacrifices in the forest. And in the afternoon, they held a worship ceremony at the temple. By nightfall, a grand banquet would take place at the imperial palace. The morning and afternoon were rituals meant for adults. So Ivan, her older brother, and she did not attend those ceremonies until the evening. Right now, they were sitting by the throne, waiting for the greetings from the vassals. During the banquet, Herdine emerged as the center of attention. The nobles whispered about the sudden debut of the legendary Delmark family's heir. They muttered to each other, "I knew at the moment I saw him at the hunting grounds and the temple sacrifice." Herdine walked coldly, the murmurs continuing behind his back. "He has to restore his family's honor and support the Empress. That won't be easy." He approached the throne and spoke solemnly. "It is an honor to welcome the new year under your reign, Your Majesty. May you continue to protect the empire with your grace in the coming years." The royals and nobles were astonished by the young man's nobility and etiquette. He truly embodied the demeanor of a family head. The Empress, seated high above, felt very pleased. Herdine's youth and beauty made him stand out even more in the crowd. However, seeing this boy having to shoulder the burden of a family head so early, Blair couldn't help but feel pity for him. She easily recognized the lonely melancholy in Herdine's eyes. The story continued to pour from Blair's warm memories. She didn't hesitate to tell the therapist about her initial fear when they first met. Madame Agnes expressed her admiration for the bond that grew from childhood friends to marriage, calling it a truly romantic story. Blair asked skeptically, "Really?" Agnes laughed. "Of course, isn't that every girl's dream?" She emphasized, "Not to mention your partner is the Grand Duke. But of course it's your love that makes it so romantic, Duchess." Blair was surprised. "Love?" Agnes nodded. "Yes, because you are the one who cherished that memory." She was even more surprised when Agnes pointed out, "You must have other memories of the New Year's festival, Duchess, yet you mostly remembered the Duke." The therapist's assertion left Blair stunned. "You must have loved him very much." Blair lowered her head in silence. She couldn't say that he had completely captured her heart in her past life. Actually, there was another part of her memory from that banquet that she hadn't mentioned. Amidst the bustling noise, little Blair walked past the murmuring gossip about poor Herdine. "Good heavens, how tragic," they said. He stood there, likely having heard it all, but still maintained an indifferent expression. They said that the young Duke of Delmark had a striking face, but to look so cold at such a young age was unexpected. Blair thought to herself that if the Empress had been there, no one would dare be so insolent, but unfortunately, she was tired and had retired to rest. And so, no one at the banquet stood up for Herdine. They even warned each other to stay away from him because he might go mad like his father and slaughter them all. "By the way, have you heard about Count Burming?" "Oh, what happened?" Herdine wasn't deaf. He brushed past all of them and walked out the door. The young boy's slender figure stood lonely among the unfamiliar adults. Light from the castle spilled out through the windows. Herdine was coughing intensely in a corner. Exhausted, he leaned against a tree trunk, suppressing his coughs. At that moment, Blair stood behind him and softly spoke. Excuse me, are you okay?" Her hand hesitantly reached out toward him. But Herdine hadn't noticed her. He abruptly spun around and yelled angrily, "Get lost! Don't touch me!" Blair's hand was swatted away, causing her to lose her balance and fall backward. Only then did Herdine stare at her in shock. The little princess sat on the snowy ground, looking up at him with expectant eyes. She asked, "Are you okay?" Her concern softened Herdine slightly. She continued to reach her hand out toward his eyes. "You look tired, I was just going to pat your back." By now, his anger had dissipated, but Herdine still stepped back as a strange sensation washed over him. He warned her, "Didn't you hear me? Get lost if you don't want to die." It was a genuine warning, devoid of any malice. Blair remembered the Empress's words about him being unapproachable due to his emotional scars. It was absolutely true, but to Blair that didn't really matter. She believed he wasn't a bad person. Herdine turned on his heel to walk away, expecting nothing from a stranger. But the image of his loneliness amidst the lavish banquet made Blair feel a pang of sympathy. Just as he indifferently turned his face to leave, Blair called out to stop him. "Don't go!" She gathered all her courage to call out Herdine's name. He froze. She said, Just wait here for a moment, I'll be right back, I promise. Herdine watched her run back into the mansion, his heart filled with confusion. He sighed, wondering what that little princess wanted. Herdine grumbled inwardly. What kind of princess doesn't know she's not supposed to run around like that? Very quickly, Blair returned just as she had promised. As Herdine sat there exhausted, her clear voice rang out, "Found you!" Herdine looked at the rushing princess and couldn't help but ask, "Why did you come back here?" She immediately placed something soft and white into our young man's hands. "I'm lending this to you." Blair explained the item in his hands. "These are rabbit fur earmuffs. If you put them on, you won't have to hear those words anymore." Herdine's hostility vanished completely, replaced only by curiosity about the soft object in his hands. Blair thought to herself, "These earmuffs will block out the sound of people gossiping. It's winter right now, so it won't look weird to them if he wears them. And this is my favorite item, Herdine." She leaned in to advertise it further. "They're super soft, too." She was full of hope that this item would make Herdine's senses and mood feel softer and more pleasant. Herdine picked up the earmuffs and examined them seemingly carefully, but in truth, he didn't care about them as much as he cared about the little girl in front of him. Just then a voice called out from afar someone was looking for Blair. She hurriedly turned to leave, not forgetting to add, "People will only remember how amazing you look." Placing a finger over her lips, she promised to keep today a secret. Herdine watched her dainty small figure disappear, feeling dazed. That night, before falling asleep, the little princess made a wish, just as she always did. Earlier, when she returned inside, Blair was drenched in sweat from running around, and her maid scolded her gently. "You can't just disappear like that, I was so worried. Why are you sweating so much?" "I'm sorry." The little girl back then simply wished that her own mother would love and care for her just like that. She wished that her mother and the Empress could get along, and her final wish for the day was dedicated to a new friend. Even though she didn't like him because he had monopolized the Empress's attention. But please, let the Duke of Delmark be happy. That night, Herdine spent quite some time touching those soft earmuffs, feeling a sense of comfort in his heart. Returning to reality, after the conversation ended, the therapist's assertion still echoed in Blair's mind. "You must have loved him very much." It was true, Blair had once loved him very much. She walked listlessly down the hallway, thinking to herself, "Just as Madame Agnes said, I was drawn to him ever since that New Year's festival." But now, not anymore. She used to cherish those days, that much was true. She had also hinted at this to Madame Agnes earlier. At that time, she had smiled. Sometimes a moment of happiness can give us the strength to live an entire lifetime. I hope this year's New Year festival will bring you such memories, Duchess. Thinking of those kind words, Blair grumbled in frustration. Memories, Even so, it's a new year I've already lived through, so there's nothing new about it. Her footsteps grew quiet. For a moment, her emotions suddenly became a tangled mess. Come to think of it, she didn't even have memories of how this New Year's Day played out in her past life. Her memory of their first New Year's festival after getting married had become so faded. She didn't have much of an impression of it. Perhaps their relationship had been quite distant after their marriage and their past life. While trying to rummage through her memories, Blair suddenly flinched, her eyes widening in fear. The man she both loved and hated had just opened the door for her. She was standing exactly in front of his room. Herdine asked coldly, "What brings you here at this hour?" Blair gathered all her courage to say, "There's something I simply must tell you. Tomorrow a demonic beast will appear at the New Year's festival hunting grounds. It would be best if you sent someone to scout the area and set up defenses before the hunt begins." These words left Herdine astonished. He stared intently at his wife. He asked, "Where did you hear that from?" Blair lowered her head and stammered, I... She made up a lie on the spot. "I can see the future." Herdine looked at his wife in shock. "What did you just say?" The truth was, about an hour ago, Blair had realized something. Thanks to her conversation with Agnes, Blair remembered that in her past life, a demonic beast had attacked during the hunt. That incident wasn't prominent in her memory because it hadn't happened right in front of her. Blair had caught a cold that day. Lena had recounted how the Duke got hurt, but fortunately, no one was killed. Lena had mentioned that the Duke was covered in the beast's blood but wasn't injured, and Blair had felt relieved at the time. But she suddenly grew worried when thinking about the risks to her husband. Following the original flow of the past, he was supposed to be fine. But what if her interference had altered that flow? Blair turned pale with fear. What if things got worse because she had impacted them? And how would she explain it if he asked how she knew beforehand? Was she supposed to say she had been reincarnated? Would Herdine actually believe such a ridiculous story? Blair weighed her options for a long time before sighing. At this moment, the prepared words just tumbled out of Blair's innocent mouth. I can see the future. Herdine looked at her for a moment with deep skepticism. Then he rubbed his temples wearily. You expect me to believe that right now? Blair pleaded. It sounds absurd, but please believe me. It never hurts to be prepared. She thought to herself, he trusted me about Lena last time. A person who protected me immediately without hesitation. Perhaps he'll believe me this time too. Even though this was more absurd than that situation, she still hoped for success. He simply replied helplessly, I understand. But what he was truly focusing on wasn't the content of her story. Herdine suddenly grabbed her waist. He tensed up as he pulled her small frame tightly against his own. Then why don't you predict what I'm going to do next? Blair was so caught off guard she was dazed. Her husband's expression seemed a chaotic mess. He whispered close to her face, Is it that hard to guess? After all, it's quite simple. Terrified, Blair pushed him away. The bitter past had not faded from her heart. His touch only filled her with disgust. Blair turned away. I'm sorry. I must have been daydreaming. Thinking that her warning to him hadn't been very successful, she turned to head back to her room. Herdine didn't try to hold her back. He sadly turned and went back inside. He picked up the glass of hard liquor on the table and downed it in one gulp to calm himself. Wiping away the drops of liquor on his lips, Herdine sighed, restraining himself. What was she thinking? Coming here at this hour in that flimsy nightgown? The next day finally arrived. The hunting ceremony commenced early. Blair's warning wasn't ignored by Herdine. He and his retinue rode their horses on patrol around the area. He looked back, silently observing his wife. He wondered to himself, what on earth is she thinking, daring to follow us all the way here after saying such things? Herdine instructed warily, Kyle, ensure the Duchess's absolute safety. Yes, my lord. From the front, with his keen senses, he realized the cold was causing his little princess to cough miserably. As he frowned in pity for his wife, a subordinate shouted, My lord, there's a white stoat over there. Herdine drew his bow and aimed with cold precision. The arrow flew rapidly through the air. The white stoat only had time to turn its head in confusion before it could react. Its terrified squeak rang out, then quickly fell silent. The hunting party cheered, praising the legendary duke's skill. Having watched this, Blair felt horrified. Herdine dismounted and walked over to the animal he had just hunted. Suddenly, a small cry from the base of a tree caught his attention. Inside a hollow was a baby stoat, and the one over there was its mother. Herdine didn't say a word. He drew the small dagger in his hand and slowly crouched down. Blair cried out, Herdine! What are you doing? Her call made him stop. But with the dagger still raised, he replied, Without its mother to care for it, it will soon become a meal for other predators. It's better to let it lie beside its mother. A fairly convincing logic, yet the little stoat slept soundly, oblivious to it all. Blair suddenly screamed, No! She jumped off her horse and rushed over to grab his hand, her face filled with panic. Herdine said helplessly, What do you think you're doing? Blair pleaded, It can survive. She looked at him full of reproach. Even if it's destined to die young like you said, you can't call this mercy. Living another day is still better than dying. Herdine frowned. Do you think you would feel that way while being eaten alive by wolves? Blair clung to his arm, begging, I will raise it. Her eyes were resolute, filled with both fear and a tragic resentment. Herdine finally sheathed his dagger. It was the only way to detach her hands from him. He said coldly before turning to leave, I wonder if this creature would truly want to be adopted by the one who stood by and watched its mother die. Blair watched him go. She understood the hidden meaning in those words, but she was still just a traumatized child who had lost her memories at the time. She spoke up. Even so, I'm sure its mother would want it to live, even if it's like this. She also had another memory, one where Aziel might have lived when his mother sacrificed herself to protect him. Holding the baby stoat in her hands, Blair felt immense pity for it. She missed her son so much. What had happened to Aziel after she died in her past life? Did that cruel man hurt him? Even if he managed to survive, he would be a thorn in Herdine's side, because he only ever loved Miela Elias. The thought of her orphaned son made Blair's heart ache. The questions swirled endlessly in her mind. Blair truly understood. Aziel's fate couldn't have been good either. She stared at her husband's back, full of resentment. Once again, I hate you. Kyle stepped up and offered to hold the little animal so she could mount her horse. But Blair dared not trust anyone, clutching it tightly. It's fine, I'll hold it. She ignored Kyle's words. Riding a horse in your current condition will be very difficult, Duchess, and it's dangerous too. Her husband looked back and felt a twinge of pain, so much so that he had to frown. Herdine dismounted and walked back toward Blair. Before she could say another word, his large hands had already lifted her up. He placed her onto his own horse and commanded loudly, "Keep an eye on the Duchess's horse." His indulgence toward her was truly commendable. On horseback, Blair kept insisting on getting down to walk, claiming she was fine, while her husband noted that without using her hands, she couldn't ride. Blair sulked and didn't say anything else, and Herdine had never been one for many words. However, his arm wrapped even tighter around her waist. She claimed she was fine, but her coughing fits from the cold betrayed Blair. She was suddenly stunned when he gently pulled her cloak's hood up to cover her. Blair asked, "Why did you follow me all the way here?" Herdine replied, "I heard that demonic beasts often appear in this area. You should have stayed at the estate for safety." Blair glanced back at her husband's warmth, gradually calming down. She had been looking around all this time and hadn't seen a single demonic beast. There were no strange roars. Did this mean the past had been altered by her presence? She lowered her head and whispered, "I'm sorry. I must have just had a nightmare." But right as she finished speaking, a massive blood-red eye stared right at her. Blair was so terrified she lost her voice. It took her forever to softly cry out, "Herdine!" just as the monster lunged upward. It swatted a large tree, snapping it in half with a loud crack. Its horrifying appearance made the beast's destructive power all the more terrifying. Blair had never witnessed it before. Even as she was thrown to the ground, she couldn't scream, only hearing her husband's desperate shout, "Blair!" It was a rare occasion for him to call her by name. Kyle rushed over to protect the Duchess, while Herdine only had a moment to glance over and confirm his wife wasn't severely injured. Even the small animal remained intact in Blair's hands. He held her tightly in fear. "Can you stand up?" Blair let out a soft, helpless cry of fear. She watched her husband cast protective magic to shield them, before passing out in his arms. Herdine held her with one arm, glaring at the monster amidst the soldiers' screams, "My lord, hurry and dodge!" It was gigantic and ferocious, relentlessly chasing after him. Herdine felt more terrified than ever before. Holding her, he leaped out of its reach, simultaneously ordering the archers to fire. Immediately, a barrage of sharp arrows struck the beast. Fortunately, thanks to her warning, they were ready for battle. Handing Blair over to Kyle, he took off his cloak while barking orders. "Squad 1, quickly escort the Duchess out of the forest right now. Squad 2, stay with me and hold back the monsters." Herdine draped his coat over his wife's shoulders and said, "Just hold on for a little while." But as soon as he turned to leave, his hand was tightly grabbed by hers. "Wait." She knew that in the future, Herdine would survive. He would be safe, she knew that. But facing this danger right now, her heart was still in a panic. She looked at him in fear, her eyes full of sorrow. Herdine reassured her, "Do you think I'm going to die?" To him, this concern from her was a first since their marriage, and he was touched by it. However, Blair was still handed over to Squad 1. "Duchess, we have to go." Herdine and the beast officially clashed. Leaping high into the air and slashing downwards, Herdine truly proved himself a legend. His powerful sword strikes, imbued with magic, made the space around them flash brightly. But this monster was no pushover, it was even faster than he was. Herdine delivered a direct, precise slash to its weak point. The monster clutched its head and roared, yet it remained completely unharmed. Herdine stepped back slightly. The clash was so intense that Squad 1, who hadn't even left yet, had to look back and worry. Wait, is his attack too weak? The sword can't even pierce its skin? Herdine terrifyingly realized he didn't have enough mana to deal with this horrendous monster. He was standing on the brink of imminent danger. Over there, the knights were also worried. He hasn't gathered enough mana. What is going on? Herdine gripped his sword tightly and calculated. In this situation, I'll slice off its limbs first to immobilize it. Swinging his sword downward, Herdine immediately executed his plan. But the moment he got closer, it locked its sights on him. Herdine only had time to freeze and stare at it before being snatched up by its massive hand. He struggled helplessly. The monster was just too huge. Blair watched him in horror, screaming, "Herdine, Herdine!" Just then, beams of red light emanated from her and flew into the air like threads. One of those red beams shot past Herdine's eyes, startling him. In that moment of despair, a strange image appeared in his mind. It was Blair, pregnant, smiling at him affectionately. Herdine was stunned, wondering to himself, what in the world is this memory? This is the latest episode of this series. Please follow the channel to see the next developments. Thank you.